I want to start out by thanking all of you people who invited me to come up for your 50th anniversary. It's just been a great conference, and I know we're not supposed to do this, but would you consider me for the next 50th one? I'd like to especially thank Don who invited me here. I want to thank Jerry, who's been my host and taken such good care of me. And I also want to thank the old archivist from Fairbanks, Alaska. You know, I had never met Dave, but we had corresponded for 10 years. And we finally got to meet face to face, and it's a wonderful experience for me. And I thank Dave for being here. I want to thank the committee that put this on. I know these things don't just happen. A lot of people do a heck of a lot of hard work. Let's hear it for the committee. Yeah. My name is Bob S., and I'm an enthusiastic Al-Anon. I think I got here like all of us Al-Anons. I love an alcoholic. My present wife, the incumbent, I get a little more respect that way, is a recovering alcoholic with 18 years of sobriety, and believe me, folks, for that I am truly grateful. I think we're going to have a happy time together. You know, these are happy programs. Serious programs, but happy programs. I had a woman sponsor when I first came in, and I know that we're not supposed to have sponsors of the opposite sex, but the only male Al-Anon that I found was about the age of my son, and I didn't think we'd have too much going. And this lady's older than I, and, you know, I want you to understand that at my age, this sex thing is not nearly as big a problem. Now, I love to see you beautiful women. Don't misunderstand me. I just can't remember why. I'd like to tell you that I volunteered for service, but it's not so. My sponsor goaded me into it. I've been the GR and the DR, and I served 3 years with the West Texas Assembly. And a few years back, I got a call from our central office at Al-Anon asking me if I would consider myself to be a candidate for trustee at large for Al-Anon. And I seemed to have the educational qualifications for which they searched. And I prayed about it. And I talked to my people, and finally I said yes. I said I would be happy to be considered a trustee at large for all of Al-Anon. And guess what, folks? I didn't get it. I was hurt. This was rejection. But the point I want to make is my program came to my rescue like it always does when I let it. And I said, hey, whoever got that job was much better qualified than I, was going to do an infinitely better job than I was capable of doing, and maybe my Heavenly Father had something else He wanted me to do. Free. Totally free of that. I don't have any resentments about that anymore, because that's what our program does for me, and I assume it does for you. It does it for me most of the time. I'm somewhat of an anachronism in that I'm the only person still living that was present when the two co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous met for the very first time at the home of Henrietta Seiberling, Akron, Ohio, Mother's Day, 1935. My dad's Dr. Bob and my mother's Ann, and I rode out with my parents to meet with Bill that day. And I've reached this wonderful stage in life now. Nobody can say, "Now, Bob, that's not the way it happened." We lived in a one industry town, Akron, Ohio, and it was in the middle of the last Great Depression, and times were terrible there. When the Depression came on, people stopped buying cars, and Akron made tires, and it just fell on its face economically, and there was very little work. The rubber shops were down to 2 days a week. There were strong men on the street corners selling apples for 5 cents a piece, trying to support their family, and it was a terrible time. But I think it was providentially arranged in that people had time for each other. They weren't as harried and hurried as we seem to be now. And this was very, very essential, I think, for the start of AA. I consider this a program, or these programs came from absolutely nothing. And they're a series of nudging miracles that God has allowed to happen so that you and I can be together like we are today. My mother said to Bill, and this I think is the first miracle. She didn't say, why don't you come over, we're going to have chicken next Thursday. She said, Bill, come live with us. Maybe you two can work out something that will work for yourselves and others. Now that's a miracle. You know, Bill was from New York City. I'll tell you the second miracle. Bill said, okay. So he moved into our house, and he stayed all summer. Now, these two guys couldn't have raised $50 between them. But they had two things going for them as I saw it. And I was 17 at the time. And so I was old enough to kind of know what was going on. They both had open spiritual minds, and they had the desire to be of service to another human being. So they set out to find another alcoholic. Now, the first one I remember was a young guy by the name of Eddie R., who had just been thrown out of his house with his cute little blonde wife and 2 stair-step kids for non-payment of rent. So they moved the whole family into our house, took Eddie upstairs and locked him up there, where he'd be available as they got this knowledge. Hey, folks, you've got to remember that nothing's written. They're just trying to stay a page ahead of Eddie. But Eddie was an agile young guy, and he'd open the second-story window, and we had downspouts, and he'd slide down the downspouts and escape. And they had to postpone Eddie's recovery long enough to recapture him. One time, Eddie got as far away as Cleveland, Ohio, 35 miles. Called him up on the phone, collect, to let them know that he was going to commit suicide. But that he would give them time to drive up and witness the event. Can you imagine a more inauspicious start? Well, anyway, when they brought Eddie back home, when Eddie sobered up, he had some mental problems that hadn't surfaced. And he began beating up on this cute little lady to whom he was married. And then he began chasing my mother around the house with a butcher knife. So we held a group conscience meeting. And it was decided that the only thing to do with Eddie was for his wife to take him back to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and recommit him in a mental institution. And this was done, and Dr. Bob and Bill were crestfallen. Here's their first attempt to work together to sober up another alcoholic. Total failure. But I want to tell you folks something. At my dad's funeral, 15 years later, a man walked up to me and he said, "Do you know me?" And I looked at him and I said, "Yeah, I know you. You're Eddie." And he said, "That's right." And he said, "I want you to know I'm a member of the Youngstown, Ohio AA group, and I've been sober 1 year." So we never know the result of that 12-step call. We're only called on to take that hand that reaches out for help. That's for our part of it. And thank God we don't have to be fully qualified. I wonder how many of us would make a 12-step call that are fully qualified. That's not it. I think the results depend upon perhaps the zeal of the person receiving the message and the will of our Heavenly Father. But I've made the 12-step call, and I'm sure you have too, where the person I called on wished I wasn't there. And pretty soon I wished I wasn't there. And I could see some of you have done that. But just remember, our deal is to make the call. We're not responsible for the results. You know, they started treating these alcoholics in our home. Now, Dr. Bob, being the only medicine man associated with this fledgling movement, would take the guy upstairs in our home. You see, hospital beds were very expensive in those days. A double was $16 a day. I think they're up a little now, but anyway, they'd bring him into our house, and Dr. Bob would take the guy upstairs, and he'd say, "Now, fella, I'm going to give you this shot of whiskey, but I want you to take this little bit of medicine first." And it was formaldehyde, and I heard someone talk about formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is a very pungent sedative. If you've ever smelled it, you'll never forget it. I know when my sister and I were going to school, we opened the front door and smelled formaldehyde. We knew we'd lost our bed. But then when the guy came to and he knocked him out for 24 to 36 hours, really gave him a jolt, they brought him downstairs and started the food, you know, the health food to steady the nerves and get the mind to functioning again. And they had a standard diet they used. It was canned tomatoes, sauerkraut. Yeah, Bill had an ulcer and he thought sauerkraut cured everything. And K-Rose syrup. I think you'll agree the early alcoholics were a hardy group. And, you know, these weren't just overnight people. Arch, too, went on and started AA in Detroit, stayed almost a year. That's how bad a shape he was in when they got there. People ask me, well, how did you feel about all these guys? And I want to tell you, this was fun. This was recovery. You see, the first 17 years of my life, I'd lived in a home with active alcoholism, and I know the anguish and sadness and distress that caused. And here they were bringing these guys in, and, you know, with the blank eyes, and pretty soon in a couple of days you begin to see a little twinkle. And then pretty soon you've got a viable human being on your hands, and it was wonderful. Just wonderful. That was recovery. How did they do it? I like to talk about recovery. I think all of us know how to be miserable. Okay, here's what they used. Now, Bill in New York had belonged to an organization called the Oxford Group for 2 or 3 months, and my dad and mom in Akron had belonged to it for 2.5 years. And the Oxford Group had nothing to do with Oxford. England was started by a Lutheran minister, Frank Buckman. And the basic tenets of it was back to first century spirituality. That was the deal. And they were very, very zealous people, and they worked hard. And they had 4 absolutes that had been incorporated in our programs: absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, absolute purity of thought, and absolute love. And you can see those in our program. They had a form of a 5th step. They used to take a new guy upstairs, and 5 or 6 of them would bore in on him till he finally confessed what his problem was. Now, we don't do it that way anymore. I used to go to some of those meetings with my mom and dad. Probably, maybe, I can't remember exactly why, but probably to get out of the doghouse. You can't tell by looking at me, but I was not a constant source of joy to my parents. But they were so zealous, they scared me. You know, this was in the face. Are you maximum today? And I'm thinking, gosh, I'm barely minimum, you know. But anyway, we owe those people a tremendous debt of gratitude, and it was inevitable that they part because the Oxford Group had several things that didn't fit. The Oxford Oxford group catered to the upper middle class, and believe me, the early alcoholics were not upper middle class. The Oxford group wanted publicity, and the alcoholics had already had all the publicity they wanted. And they had this form of open confession, which was not acceptable to people of the Catholic faith, because they believe in a close confession. So it was inevitable they part, and they did. But we owe those people a tremendous debt of gratitude. What did they use? They used God's big book, the 13th Corinthians, the Sermon on the Mount, and as you all know, the book of James. Faith without works is dead. And these are the things that they used as tools. But the thing I think that was able to bring it together is communication with each other. They met all the time with each other. And they fed all their interests, all their problems, all their solutions. And that big book, that first 164 pages, is really the result of all these meetings and all these, they had arguments. Yes, they did. But again, I think that big book was inspired by God. The only thing that's been changed in that big book was, other than we are 100 members now, they kept jacking it up. But the only thing that's been changed in the first 164 pages is what? Bill had a spiritual experience. Most of us don't get it that way, so it was changed to what? Spiritual what? Awakening, right. And just think of all the millions of alcoholics who tried to find a loophole in those first 164 pages. I want to tell you about my dad. You'd have loved the guy. Dr. Bob only lived 15 years. He was 15 years older than Bill when they started. But in that length of time, he personally treated AA-wise and medically, without charge, over 5,000 alcoholics. I like to think of my dad as being Mr. 12-Step. Dad was a tall, thin Vermonter. Like most of the people there, he said very few words, but what he said is very meaningful. He had icy blue eyes that could look right through you, and a great sense of humor. When I brought my bride to be home, my wife Betty is tall and thin, and Dad looked her over and said, she's built for speed and light housekeeping. And I don't think I'll offend you. I want to tell you about the sex and hygiene lecture he gave me as a teenager. He got me in the bathroom one day and closed the door, and I thought, hot dog, I'm going to find out all about it now. He said to me, flies spread disease, keep yours buttoned. Dad was a graduate of Dartmouth, one of the Ivy League colleges back in the East, the Drinkers Ivy League College, and he fit right in there. And he'd worked in industry a couple of years and then prevailed upon his dad, who was a probate judge up there, to send him out to Chicago to medical school. Barely got through medical school because his drinking was progressive like it always is, but obtained a coveted internship there at City Hospital in Akron and moved there and married my mother after a whirlwind courtship of only 17 years. Dr. Bob thought things over very carefully. Now, you'd have loved Bill, too, but those two guys were absolute opposites. Bill also was a tall, thin Vermonter. They were born within 100 miles of each other, but Bill was garrulous. Bill was a visitor. Bill loved to talk. Bill was a visionary. I think Bill Wilson could see further up the road than any human I've ever known in my life. These two guys were absolute opposites, and they never had an argument. And again, I think that was providentially arranged. Folks, if any two of us are exactly alike, one of us is unnecessary. And I've heard this said, If Alcoholics Anonymous had been left up to Dr. Bob, it would still be in Ohio. And if Alcoholics Anonymous had been left up to Bill Wilson, he'd have sold it to a franchise. Well, at first it was just a trickle. It didn't grow very fast. And then the media got a hold of it. Wow, what a difference. The word got out that there was a doctor in Akron, Ohio, could, quote, fix drunks. And they came in on the bus and on the train, dropped off by loving relatives. Dropped off by relatives who weren't so loving. But again, I think our Heavenly Father provided the right person at the right time. Sister Ignatia was the admitting nurse at a Catholic hospital there. And she and Dr. Bob and Father Haas prevailed upon the Mother Superior to allow them to start an alcoholic ward. And it was just a flower room. But it was the first center that I know of that people could be admitted with the disease of alcoholism rather than some guys like gastroenteritis. This was actually the first time that I know of that people could be admitted. Now, that thing is still in that hospital. It's not the flower room. It's a whole 5th floor. But it's been in continuous operation ever since. Did you ever think about some of the miracles that these programs have that allow us to be together like this? How about this one? Money. AA and Al-Anon don't have any money. They don't want to have any money. And, you know, Bill and Dr. Bob are human beings, and they decided, boy, wouldn't it be great if they could get a hold of some dough. They could really build treatment centers, and I'm sure my dad could see himself in his white coat greeting the patients, and Bill maybe out on the street flagging them in, you know. So they went up to Mr. Rockefeller's group in New York to meet with him. These are people with deep, deep pockets, to see if they couldn't get some money for this marvelous thing they had going. Mr. Rockefeller and his group, in their infinite wisdom, said, no, money will ruin it. Visualize in your mind what would have happened if Mr. Rockefeller and his group had dumped $1 million on 100 broke drunks. It's just awful to even think of, isn't it? Anonymity. You know, I think that's another one of the miracles. In the early days, there were people with large egos. Now, I know we don't have that problem anymore. But you can't be Mr. AA or Mrs. Al-Anon if nobody knows what your name is. And another thing that's done, folks, what that has done, it doesn't make any difference if you've been here 40 years or 40 days. We're all exactly the same. Isn't that right? We're all exactly the same. And that's the way it should be. God, as we understood him, that was put in there to quiet a loud-mouthed agnostic by the name of Jimmy B. from California. Jimmy said this God stuff will ruin it. Said it'll run them out faster than we can bring them in. So and Jimmy was quite vocal, so quiet Jimmy down, they inserted God as we understood him. And you know what that's done, folks? That has allowed these movements to go into all the Eastern religions and people that have an entirely different concept of a higher power than perhaps you and me. That has to be a miracle. Just a miracle. The early AAs were all men. All middle-aged, low-bottom drunks, like I see in this front row here. There was one lady came along fairly early in the program by the name of Elsie. But they caught Elsie doing a little 13-step work on Dr. Bob's examining table with an AA by the name of Mitch. You know, the wives and sweethearts just went up in smoke. And so it was decided to stick to the men for the time being. I think Elsie set you gals back 2 years all by herself. But thank God you're here. Thank God you're here. I want to talk to you about my mom. You know, nobody knows anything about my mom. She was one that always stayed in the background, but what a beautiful, beautiful lady she was. Now remember, she's the one that invited Bill to come. She's the one that made the beds, and she's the one that cooked the food, and she's the one that cleaned up the messes, and she's the one that endured the snubs. You know, we weren't very popular, and AA was not what you'd call an instant success. And we were taking these people into our home. And if you want to get a feel for that, start a halfway house in your home and see what the neighbors do. We even got kicked out of the Presbyterian Church on account of the AA, and I never heard of anyone getting kicked out of the Presbyterian Church, but we did. So you see, it was a big struggle by a lot of people. And I have a letter that I want to excerpt. This was a letter written to Bill by Henrietta D., who is the wife of the AA number 3, the attorney, the Southern attorney, the man on the bed. And she's writing a bill about Mom. Said on Friday, June 28, 1935, I met Ann Smith. I met Dr. Bob on Thursday morning in the hospital. On Thursday evening, when I went to the hospital to see my husband, Dr. Bob was there, and he said, the little woman would like you to come to her at the house. And I told him I couldn't go that night, but would go the next night. On Friday night, when I went to the house on Ardmore Avenue, I met the most thoughtful, understanding person I've ever known. And I skip a little bit. Ann taught me to surrender myself to God and ask Him if He had a plan for me for the day. Ann taught me to have a quiet time in the morning, and she insisted that the early AAs have it also, that I might feel near to God and might receive strength for the day. She taught me to surrender my husband to God and not to try and tell him how to stay sober, as I had tried that and failed. And taught me to love everyone. She said, ask yourself what is wrong with me today if I don't love you. She said the love of God is triangular. It must flow from God, through me, through you, and back to God. And I skip a little bit and I go on here. Ann made it very plain to me from the beginning that she wanted no credit for herself. All she wanted was to keep herself so that she could know and follow God's plan. In the early part of 1936, Ann organized a women's group for wives of alcoholics, whereby in her loving way she tried to teach us patience, love, and unselfishness. So you see, she recognized right from the word go that it was a family disease. And I close with, when I met and talked with this intelligent, deeply spiritual woman, I was completely sold on AA. Well, you know, Mom invited Lois to come out and visit with us while Bill was there, and Lois came out and stayed as long as she could. You got to remember, Lois is the only one that had a job. And it started a friendship that lasted until Lois passed away. My mom died in 1949. But when Lois, our beloved co-founder with Ann B., who is not my mother, but Ann B., started Al-Anon, she had written a letter to all the AA groups around the country to see if there was any interest in this kind of a program. And to her surprise, she found out there were 64 groups already doing it. Figured it out themselves. Independent thinking. So you see, the need has been there. I've got a little time left, and I want to talk to you about my family. My wife, Betty, put her dad in a drying out place in Denver in 1945. And he and another guy started Alcoholics Anonymous in New Mexico. Now, if there was ever two human beings that should have recognized alcoholism, it was my wife and me. But you see, we didn't. You've got to understand, we were different. Yeah. We attended the first international in 1950 with my dad. My mother died the year before, and that was the one where they adopted the 12 traditions. And, the longer I'm in the program, the more I realize that 12 traditions is a glue that holds us together. That's the glue that holds us together, and I'm so delighted that you read it at all the meetings, because we might have self-destructed like the Washingtonians, a group 150 years before did. They got to thinking they were so great about alcohol that they was good for everything. Even got into the issue of slavery, and they just, boom, they disappeared in a very short time. So I think the fact that they adopted those traditions at that first international was one of the great events. And Betty and I attended the second international. Bill invited us in St. Louis, and that's the one where the spiritual people like Dr. Sam Shoemaker and Father Ed Dowling got up and gave talks, and these guys were great. You know, they loved AA when AA wasn't cool. And if you ever... the chapter Religion looks at AA in the big book AA Comes of Age. Is the exact copy of those talks if you're ever interested. Well, Betty and I we were party animals. We went our own way. We liked to dance and we liked to drink, you know, and I sure wasn't telling anybody my dad was Dr. Bob. But somewhere along the way, you know, it began to disintegrate. You know, I think alcoholism has got three major phases: fun and problems. You're right. But anyway, you know, we didn't say, oh, good, they were going to get to go to our programs now. Here's what we did, and I like to illustrate this. You people will appreciate this. These two hunters up here in Alaska would hire a little aviation company to take them out and dump them out on a lake, and they'd hunt for a week, and the plane would pick them up, take them back to civilization. So the little plane showed up, and then one of the hunters said, oh, I'm so glad you're here. We've had a wonderful hunt. We've got 4 moose. And the pilot said, you two guys and me and 4 moose in this little airplane? He said, don't worry about it. Man came in with a plane looked exactly like yours last year. And he said what he did was he taxied up the river and got a longer run at it. Well, the pilot was new to the company, and he thought, well, I've got to try it. So he did, and sure enough, the little plane finally gets airborne, and they start back to civilization. But the little engine is overheating, and it starts losing power, and way out in the wilderness, it just crashes. And one of the hunters digs his buddy out from under the plane, dusts him off, and his buddy said, oh, where in the world are we? The other said, you know, I think we're within 100 yards of where we crashed last year. That was the way our life was going, trying the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Betty finally just decided she had to do something. So she went, and another guy said, we're forming a group for AA here in Nocona, Texas. Betty, will you come? She said, I wonder how he knew. Well, of course, everybody in town, the 3,000, knew who the town drunks were. But anyway, she went, and she didn't go to a treatment center. She just hung on by her fingernails, and she said, I don't recommend that, but she said, that's one thing I'll tell you, you'll never forget it. And that's the way she did. And I wasn't just jumping up and down to have her join AA. I didn't really want the party to be over yet. But I could see the progress that she was making by working hard with her program, and she was running off and leaving me. So someone said to me, well, why don't you join Al-Anon? And I thought, well, why not? I don't mind joining the auxiliary. So I got my car and drove 40 miles away to Gainesville, Texas, and I walk into my first Al-Anon meeting, and I'm the only man. Well, I immediately got mixed emotions about Al-Anon. And I like to describe mixed emotions this way. It's the feeling you get when your teenage daughter comes in at 4 a.m. with the Gideon Bible under her arm. But I stayed, and I really laid a trip on those gals. You know, I explained to them how really wonderful I was, the rock that had been holding the family together. You know, and bloody but unbowed. And they listened to all that stuff. Now, you got to realize, this was reality to me. That's one problem that we have, either program, is what is reality? Reality for me was right up there, and I was sincere. Reality for them, who had the experience in the program, was over here, and it was different. But anyway, they listened to me, and I left, and I kept coming back. I got, you know, these things are revealed to us as we can handle them. I said to Ann, do you remember the first meeting I came to? And she said, oh, yeah, I remember it. I remember it well. I said, after you left, we held a meeting. And we said, boy, there's a sickie, and he ain't going to make it. And then again, it's revealed to me as we can handle it, you know. Later on, I found out there was not a darn one of them would volunteer to sponsor me. But anyway, our paths have gone down a parallel, you know, through communicating with each other. That's a big, big plus, because we had a lot of anger on both sides. I used to think that a marriage had to be 50-50. And you people have taught me, no. Sometimes it's 90-10. Sometimes it's 10-90. And what's the difference? What's the difference? I had to learn that I can easily fall back on what I used to be and destroy everything I've learned. You know, one of the most profound statements I've ever heard an alcoholic lady make was this. She said, the person I was will drink again. Thought, wow, how true. If you slide back and become the person you were, you'll drink again. If you're the Al-Anon, you'll get sick again. So all these things have added up, and we've had a wonderful life together. I don't drink anymore. I don't know how you handle it, and I really, it's none of my business. But we go down this road parallel with each other, and it's been a great life. We finally got the house paid for and the cars paid for. We have 4 kids. One of them had a bachelor's degree, 2 had master's degree, and 1 a doctorate. And life was just going great. The 22nd of November of last year, I got a call, and they said, your son has just left work, sat in his car, took a gun, and blew his brains out. Beautiful guy. Had a master's degree cum laude from the University of Texas, member of Mensa, the people with a genius IQ. Played football, was an athlete. He was a top BMW salesman in Dallas, made plenty of money, had a gorgeous blonde wife and a beautiful home. But he couldn't stand that corporate pressure. He just couldn't live with it. And we had to face that. And again, our program came to our rescue. You know, I thought this, gee, why do bad things happen to good people? Well, somebody explained to me, well, bad things happen to bad people, too. So anyway, our group has just held us in their hands, you know, until we recovered from this. And about, maybe 8 months ago, my wife began getting a vertigo, and she smashed up 2 cars. Didn't hurt anybody. Made junk out of one of them. And we thought, what's the matter with her? So we started the rounds of the doctors. And it turned out that my wife, Betty, has lung cancer. Now, this is my bride. You know, October 7th, shortly after I leave here, we will have been married 53 years. So now I'm thrust into what I call the caregiver mode. You know, and I sure didn't want to be like Job in the Bible. I didn't even like that guy, all the problems he had. But anyway, I've been thrust into this caregiver mode, and again, my program stands me in good stead. Instead of griping about it, what comes to me is this. Said, you know, men are not demonstrative. This is my way of showing Betty every day that I love her. So it's an opportunity for me. So that's what we're doing now. We have hopes that she will recover. We've got prayers from people all over the United States and all over Canada and all over Mexico. I hope some of you will add her perhaps to your prayer list. But thank God we had the program to keep us going. Why do I stay? Why do I keep coming back? I keep coming back because my program teaches me how to get rid of that squirrel cage thinking that I used to have. You know, round and round and no solutions. You've showed me how to do that. I keep coming back because as a child of an alcoholic, you have taught me that I am not a victim. You know, boy, you can hide behind that one if you've been raised in an alcoholic family. All the crap you did and all the things you didn't do. It's not my fault. I was a victim. Well, I don't know about you, but every time I did something bad, I knew it. And I know that if I keep my mental process in the victim mode, it has to be fed by resentments, continuing resentments. And that's the one thing that will destroy me. So I say to you, I don't know how you're handling this. Were any of you raised in an alcoholic home? Raise your arm. Wow. Okay, I can say this to you. Personally, I do not intend to remain forever frozen in the role of an injured adolescent. Yeah. I stay because when I can talk to you like I can, show you how I am, warts and all, and you to me the same way, we have an instant intimacy. I don't care where you come from or what your walk in life is. If we can see each other with the barriers down, talk to each other, we have an instant intimacy, and I know of no other organizations in the world that can do that. And what that does for me, it dispels loneliness. And I think that's a problem that most people have in this life, is being lonely. So I'm so glad that the program was there, that somebody kept it green for me. You know, we all have an accountability. Somebody handed it out to us. Our accountability is to hand it out to somebody else. But in doing that, that's our pleasure. You know, Dr. Albert Schweitzer said, I know not what your destiny may be, but this one thing I do know, that those among you who will find true happiness are those who have sought and found how to serve. Thank you very much.
Okay, the next speaker we have this morning is an Alateen, and her name is Ariel, and we'd like to welcome Ariel this morning.
Thank you. My name's Ariel, and I'm an Alateen.
Hi, Ariel.
And both my parents were drinking, and there wasn't that much, well, actually there was no abuse, at least that I saw, and I'm grateful that they're sober now, but Alateen has helped me cooperate, and I'd like to thank Susan for helping me, and I'd like to thank my parents for sobering up, and for everybody in AA who helped my parents sober. And I'd like to talk about my mom's first meeting. Well, at least that I remembered. It was her last night drunk, and she came home. She walked home, and she was really mad at my dad because he didn't come to pick her up. But the meeting she left early, so she was mad for no reason, but I went upstairs to my neighbor's house, and I stayed up there, and then she called, and I came down, and that was the best time for me, because that was the first time in a long time that she actually said that she loved me. And when your parents are drinking, it's kind of hard to tell that they love you, but they really do. I'm going to cry. We just moved to a new house, and I feel really grateful because there's people next door from the program, and I'm grateful that they're there, and I'd like to thank them because they were at my mom's first meeting, and my brother doesn't know how bad it was, but he was really little, but he goes, Mom, if you ever yell at us, I'll ground you from going to meetings. And I go, you don't want to do that. You really don't want to do that. And because he got tired of my mom going to meetings so much on Christmas. She's always gone, but I always say you don't want to do that to her. And he goes, why? There's nothing wrong. It's like, there is. And I didn't know that there was a problem until my dad sobered up, because there was no other families to compare to. So I just thought my family was normal, just weird. And I was going to tell my mom that trying things over and over is known as insanity. And we have a dog now, and that's really nice. But we keep trying the same thing over and over when he bites us, and it doesn't help any. No, it's something to compare to when you go drink. And you keep drinking and drinking, what changes? Nothing. And I'm really grateful that they're sober, and I can't be thankful enough for the people who helped them. And it's hard to say anything because not much more. Besides that, when my parents were drunk, they were really drunk. And you could tell that they were drunk when they said, go over to your friend's house and play, and then they'd call you home and you'd be locked outside for half an hour. And that was the worst time for me. And my brother isn't here to hear me speak today, but he spent the night at a friend's house, and my mom wouldn't be able to do that if she hadn't sobered up, because my babysitter when I was 2 also was helping her, and he goes there now. Well, sometimes he's in school now, but he met a friend there, and their family has some older help from AA, and he's there today, and if it wasn't for them being sober, then he wouldn't be able to go over there either. And I love my family very much, but not when they're drinking. And our team has helped me learn more about my family and what was wrong with them, and I'm glad that they were there for me. And then my friend, when my mom went through this time when my dad was really trying to work because he was going to change jobs, and my mom was always out of town for AA business and things, getting ready for this. And this is a big deal, and I'm having a great time. I've been here all 3 days now. I've been working up at the registration desk, and all the people that come in and said, I'd like to register, there was a lot. And I thought that was really amazing. I thought it would be slow, but it was always busy. And that goes to show you what AA has done for everybody. And I'm glad to see this many people here today. Thanks.
You know, I keep thinking I'm at the end of getting overwhelmed this weekend. I can't see. Thank you, Ariel. Now we have a double winner who's going to speak to us, and her name's Judy from Anchorage.
Well, God did this to my voice to keep me humble. My name is Judy. I'm a grateful recovering Al-Anon, and I'm also an alcoholic. I didn't know what to talk about today, and somebody asked me early this morning what was I going to talk about, and I said, I don't know. Whatever God has in mind, I guess. I got to thinking when they asked me to speak, when did I first hear about Al-Anon? And it was an evening that my husband, who's the reason I started into Al-Anon, had driven on the Glen Highway at God only knows how many miles an hour, and 5 different people called the police. And I heard him coming up the street at an outrageous rate of speed. And he pulled into the driveway, and I went into typical Al-Anon, pre-Al-Anon mode, and I was absolutely furious. He endangered everybody, I thought. He was probably traveling over 100 miles an hour through a residential area. And he never got out of the truck. And eventually I heard him fall out of the truck. And I was so enraged, I went into the house to get a camera because I was going to have proof this time. Because he always said I made it up. So I went out into the street and took his picture laying there in the driveway. And I don't know how long he laid there. He could lay there all night for all I cared. I was so angry. But he eventually made his way into the house, and I was planning on doing something that evening, and he now ruined all my plans. So I was furious and left the house to go down to get a TV dinner now because we weren't apparently going anywhere. And it didn't take, I was living in Eagle River, and it didn't take real long to get from my house down to the store. And when I came back into this little cul-de-sac that we lived on with 5 houses, there was 4 police cars. And all the neighbors and all the children in the neighborhood watching the police, and I'm like, oh my God, he killed somebody. Or he went out in front of the house and blew his brains off. I didn't know what he did. The police wouldn't let me in the house, and they put me in the police car, and I was just hysterical crying. Now the neighbors knew. They never knew before. Car doors slamming and people screaming, and, wonderful alcoholic family. A lot of you can relate to. And I couldn't stop crying, and the policeman said to me, maybe you need to go to Al-Anon. And I guess I had heard of Al-Anon before, but never really penetrated, and I don't even know if I knew then really what Al-Anon was. In fact, he said to me, I want you to go to Al-Anon so bad. He said, I'm going to come back in a week and make sure that you went to a meeting. So I promised him anything, I guess. I said, okay. Oh, that was probably in November. My husband continued to drink, so did I, but I didn't know that was a problem. And he went off to a treatment center. And part of his recovery from this treatment center was family counseling. And I went once a week with him for family counseling. And you'd go around the room and the counselor would say, how are you this week, or how'd you get along this week? And I'd sit there and say, I'm angry and I'm frustrated. He kept drinking. And she said, well, maybe you need to go to Al-Anon. I'll think about it. So, I don't know, after I don't remember this time particularly really well. It was probably the third week when it came my turn to speak again, and I said, she asked how I was. I said I was angry and frustrated, and somehow she ended up sitting next to me, and she just patted me on my knee and said, you need to go to Al-Anon. So I decided I'd go to Al-Anon or I was going to rip this lady's face off. So I found a little Al-Anon meeting way out in Chugach, because I lived in Eagle River at the time, and I went into this meeting and I was terrified. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what to expect. And they were sitting around the table. I don't know, there was 5 or 6 people, and they had the ODAT book. And they would pick a subject and they'd read. And I was like, what the hell has this got to do with my husband drinking? I wanted to fix him. I didn't want to, they were reading out of this book. I really didn't understand. And they told me to come back to at least 6 meetings to decide if Al-Anon was for me. And maybe if I didn't like that meeting, to go to other meetings. But don't give up and keep coming back. So I bought an ODAT book, and I brought it home, and I opened it up, and it immediately grabbed me. Everything I read in there I could relate to. The attitudes and all the feelings and the frustrations and the anger, and all of it was in this little book. I grew up in an alcoholic family. My mother would have made a wonderful Al-Anon person. She was the only control that she had in her life was her home. Her house was so neat. She dusted twice a day. You could probably eat off the floor in any room in her house at any time of the day. Her drawers everything was folded perfectly, and like I said, the only control she had in her life was her home. And so I wasn't going to be that way. My house was not necessarily a disaster area, but it was lived in. And I wasn't quite that neat. Anyway, my husband was furious that I was going to Al-Anon, and he thought I was coming to meetings and sitting there at these meetings and talking about him. So I got a tape. Somebody told me to get a tape. It was a tape of a setup or an Al-Anon meeting on tape, which they have in the library. And I brought it home, and I wanted him to listen to it. Well, of course he wouldn't listen to it, and so I had it playing real loud so he could hear it. And I kept saying, see, we're not sitting here talking about you. We're talking about ourselves. We're trying to get well. We're trying to understand. And he didn't want to know anything about it. So I just kept coming back to Al-Anon because I knew that's where I was hearing things that I needed to know and and the feelings were just incredible. I'd come to meetings and I'd want to talk in minute detail about what was going on in my home, and I didn't have to, because I'd look around the table and people would be nodding their head. I think that was one of the most wonderful things I learned in Al-Anon. I didn't have to go into excruciating detail. Everybody there knew what I was talking about, knew where my feeling was coming from, and maybe even knew why I was feeling that way. I didn't know that yet, but they did. And they kept telling me, come back. The end of the reading in the Al-Anon every week says something to the effect that you may not love all of us. You may not like all of us, but you'll love us in a very special way, the same way we already love you. And I grabbed onto those words because I felt like these people really did care. They really did care. And that was a first for me. So I was in Al-Anon for I started in Al-Anon in January. And it took me from January to May to get at least enough little teeny tiny bit of honesty going with the 12 steps that I decided that perhaps I might have a problem with drinking also. And the same counselor that had insisted that I go to Al-Anon invited me to go to lunch with her one day to talk about my husband, who was still drinking and couldn't seem to stop. So I went to lunch, and we had this lunch, and she turned the conversation to my alcohol consumption, which, for my higher power working in my life on that particular day, I decided that I would answer her honestly, which I had never done before where it concerned my drinking. And we went back to her office, and we did an alcohol screening test. I came out a stage 3 alcoholic. I still don't know what that means. But that's what I was. And I came home that night, and like a good little alcoholic at that time, finished my bottle of scotch and went, how could a nice person like me be an alcoholic? I'm a good person. I know what alcoholism is. I watched my grandfather die. I watched an uncle die. I had another uncle die in a pea-soaked bed in the Bowery in New York. At least he was in a bed. I had another uncle that was in a convalescent home from a wet brain. I knew what alcoholism was all about. I had a husband that couldn't stop drinking and was getting into more and more trouble. And how could I also have this problem? I was not happy. I was devastated. And I went to a women's meeting because I wanted to see what women alcoholics look like. Because I wasn't an alcoholic. And I was totally convinced of that. And a young woman spoke that night that had just gotten out of jail for manslaughter, and I truly believed I did not belong in those rooms. But again, my higher power let me hear things that I needed to hear. And I realized that, I needed to be in those rooms, that I too had a drinking problem. I heard at an Al-Anon meeting one day, I don't know, it was probably going about 9 months, I guess, and some woman sat there and said, Alcoholics Anonymous keeps me sober, but Al-Anon keeps me sane. And it just rang through my head, and that's absolute truth. And many people that know me at meetings, you'll hear me say that often, because I truly believe it. I talk about coming to AA through the back doors of Al-Anon, because I didn't find AA first. Al-Anon is my first love, my first, I don't know how to put it in words exactly. It got me in touch with my higher power, and for that I am so grateful. It's hard to put into words sometimes just how grateful I am. I had to learn how to let go of people and places and things that I just couldn't find out from going to AA alone. I had my sponsor and I was going to bring my little green thing, which I forgot. Lucky I'm breathing, I think. And it was on the front of that little green thing is the Serenity Prayer, and she told me a different version of the Serenity Prayer, which I've used many, many, many years, and it was, God grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, courage to change the person I can, and wisdom to know that that person is me. And I've used that often. I think one of the most wonderful things I ever got out of coming to 12-Step program was serenity. And I didn't know what that was. When I first felt it, it was there and gone. And it was so elusive, and I knew I liked it, but how do you keep it? How do you get there? Wow, what is that? And it's taken me a long time. I've been coming to these rooms since 1988. And today I can honestly and truly say I have a degree of serenity. And I try to tell people, especially when they're new, when they walk through the doors of Al-Anon or AA, that you can get better. Keep coming back. Listen to people. Get a sponsor. I kind of, in my mind, I guess, kind of blend both groups together, but there is a separation, a definite separation. When I'm in one meeting, that's where I am. And if I'm in the other meeting, that's where I am. And I've learned how to do that, and I don't exactly know how I've learned how to do that, but there is a difference. When I'm in Al-Anon that y'all are not talking about me, you're talking about the disease of alcoholism and people in my life that have been affected by alcoholism, and when I'm in AA, I need to learn how I act and what I do. It's part of the disease of alcoholism. I've heard alcoholism is active alcoholism is I, self, and me go and run riot, and I was like, that's what I was. And I didn't know how to let go of people, and I learned how to do that through Al-Anon. Bob was just talking, Smitty was just talking about, his brain going crazy. I used to call it circular thinking. And my brain would take off on this tangent and just keep going and get, build and build and build. And all of a sudden I'm way down the road. I killed somebody and how did I get there? And I couldn't bring myself back. And I read in an Al-Anon book called I think it's Al-Anon book, As We Understood. A woman, a person, I don't know if it was a woman, had written in this book that she used the alphabet, each letter of the alphabet, for something to be grateful for. And I used that an awful lot. I'd go through the alphabet, each letter. I was grateful for the letter A, acceptance. Sometimes I had 400 things that I could be grateful for, all the way down to Z. I'm grateful for zoos. I like the zoo. I couldn't come up with anything else but Z. It stopped that circular thinking. I think in the first year of coming to 12-Step program, I read everything that was out there on alcoholism, Al-Anon. I can't tell you how many books and things I read until I was totally saturated myself, and I was just so full of all this information, and I finally said, I've got to stop and read a novel. You get out of the alcoholism business, but my higher power saw fit that that's what I needed, and that's what I did, and I'm weller. I'm not well, but I'm certainly weller than I was when I came here. And my voice is starting to get really weird, so thank you for letting me share.
Thank you. Good morning. It's really nice to be here and a pleasure to be here. Scared to death. Other than that, things are fine, right? I'd like to just begin by asking kind of a question, and that did anybody ever wake up and say, what am I doing here? You know, how did I get here? And what do I do next? You know, those, believe it or not, they're all spiritual questions. I didn't think that when I was drinking. I was just hoping I'd make it through the day, and maybe it'd be better if I died. But these are all questions of spirituality and have to do with spirituality. And I'd like to share with you how I did get here. At age 15, I went into a bar in Kentucky, and I had a beer. And then I had another one, as the saying goes. And I did that consistently and with great vigor until I was the 20th of September, 1985. I just kept having another one. You know, when you go into a graveyard and you look at tombstones, you see two things. You see born, you see a name, and then you see born, B, and it gives a year. My year was 1954 when I started drinking. And then you got a D, that's died, 1985. I understand those two things, but there's a little line between those two dates. Now, I've come to learn that what's important is what we write on that little line. You know, I'm a little nervous about this title, spiritual speaker. I'm more of a spiritual seeker. I think that serves me better. Been drinking from that time since 1954. Some people would call me a high-bottom drunk. All I know is my life was out of control, and it was unmanageable. Problem was I didn't know it. In high school, I looked pretty good. I lettered in 5 sports for 3 years straight. How could I have a problem? You know, everything was great, wonderful. And out of high school, I was voted most likely to succeed. Well, I succeeded all right. I succeeded in drinking my way out of the University of Cincinnati the very next year. You know, and college is crazy at best. There's little sayings, mottos, I'm sure you know them all. I'm going to get drunk, I'm going to get wasted, I'm going to get blottoed, going to get smashed, I'm going to get ripped. You know, all wonderful, wonderful life ambition goals, right? We wake up and we say, I'm going to do all this stuff. And so I got the rare opportunity of starting over at another college. My mom found a college that was off in the woods someplace. They had to sign a little thing that said, I will not drink, either at home or in school at this place. I lied about that very well. Went to the Marine Corps, put me in boot camp after I finished college. There's always Listerine. You know, whenever you want to drink, you can find one. And then so I said, well, I better get my life figured out, so I'll go across and I'll go to seminary. That sounded like a good idea. So off I go to seminary. And I get in seminary, and my wife and I was married by this time. And
my wife and I, every payday, would go across the river from Alexandria, Virginia to Washington, D.C. and buy booze. It was just our trek, you know. We had money, you buy booze. It's a very simple kind of formula. Sometimes if you don't have money, you get booze. It all depends on how you work it, right? So then, I'm cutting this kind of short. There's a lot of things that will just bore everybody in between. But the reality is, I ended up in Juneau, Alaska, fresh out of seminary. First day there, there was a knock on the door at 7 a.m. And some guy standing there, he says, "We're going to pour concrete today, and you're going to help." Pour concrete? What are they talking about? And about 3 hours later, I got a call from a personal lady. She says, "My husband's drunk, and I don't know what to do." I had to say, "I don't know either." After 3 years of education, seminary had prepared me for neither of my first two tasks, you know, pouring concrete or what to do about somebody drinking. So I found out there was an AA meeting in the church that I was going to work in, Trinity Church down there. And I go to the meeting and told the people, I said, "I need some help." Not for me, of course. But for this person, what's this alcoholism business? And there was a person there that kind of took me under his wing, clawed in. He stands up and writes on the board. You know, I think he knew he had a slow learner. That's what it was all about. He writes on the board, "Alcoholism is a disease." Seemed like a pretty good thing. And then he puts a line between the S and the E. Dis-ease. I said, that's what I've been feeling all my life. But I didn't say that out loud, of course. This was too early to get real honest about anything. He didn't put honesty up there. So I naturally had an out. So did that. I finally came to my senses, as I said, in 1985 on September 20. Went to church convention in Los Angeles. The first thing I did was go out to a liquor store and buy a bottle, and I proceeded to drink through that convention. And then after that, I said, I got to get honest. There's this wonderful story in the prodigal son thing in the scriptures about, and it's just a magnificent line. It says, he came to his senses. Came to his senses. And that's kind of what happened to me in terms of my life. There's a really fine book, I'd recommend it to you, about spirituality. It comes out of Hazleton, and it talks about the place where you begin to find your spirituality, where you begin to find what's important to you in life, is where there's kindly self-discipline, where it's safe, where there's empathy and trust, where there's dialogue and learning, and where there's community and fellowship. Sounds a whole lot like AA to me. I think that's what they had in mind when they were talking about it. It's also asked to mention the difference between religion and spirituality. I can do that real fast. Religion is a way of life, whether it's the church, whether it's the NFL, whether it's the NBA, whether it's drinking. Religion is a way of life, whatever adjective you pump in front of it. Spirituality, on the other hand, Bill W. says, we must find some spiritual basis for life or else we die. Carl Jung says that in our midlife we figure out a spiritual reason for living or we stay angry for the rest of our life. You have some choices. Always you have your choices. It's in the book, Big Book. I can't improve on the Big Book. You know, in the chapter, We the Agnostic, all about spirituality is there. You take your own inventory. It saves hours and hours a week if you only take your own inventory. You have a lot of have a lot more free time and fun time. Pray and meditate. It's all right there in the book. One of my favorite theologians, a guy named DeMello, says, wake up. You know, that's what life is about, waking up. And so I'd like to kind of close out here with two different things. One, I'm going to ask you to take part in two different things. There's negative spirituality and positive spirituality. Negative spirituality runs like this. It has to do with fear, self-pity, resentment, and dishonesty. It runs a cycle. It's like channel 1, if you will, on your TV set. Fear can be anything, whatever you happen to be afraid of. Self-pity, resentment, dishonesty. That's the negative side. The positive side is trust, gratitude, acceptance, and honesty. Now, what I'd like you to do, and this, we'll see how this works. If it gets too uncomfortable, you don't have to do it. Do something else. But look in the eyes of the person next to you. You know, everybody pick somebody and look straight in their eyes. Eyeball to eyeball. Okay. It's a little nervous, right? It's another human being out there. I want you to look right in their eyes. And I want you to just think for a second. Be quiet and meditate on this fact while you're looking into their eyes. That human being that you're looking into the eyes of, deep into the eyes of, understands fear. They understand self-pity. They understand resentments. And they understand dishonesty. And then I'd like you to switch channels, if you would, and just switch over to the channel that's the positive side of spirituality. And look in their eyes again. That human being you're looking at, and you're looking into their eyes, understands trust. They understand what it means to let go and let God. They understand turning it over. They understand trusting a higher power, as you understand that higher power. They understand gratitude. And they understand acceptance and honesty. It's a very rare thing. It's a very wonderful thing to have somebody that you know in this world that understands those and can share those with you. And so now if you'd look back up this way.